Well, I would like to speak on the subject of risk velocity. In recent times, there have been discussions around this, and I thought it would be very important to help add value to the discussions. Risk velocity, what exactly is risk velocity? Now, in physics, velocity is usually a measure of the rate of motion of a body expressed as the rate of change of its position in a particular direction with time. Now, in order to simplify this further, we'll say that velocity means how fast something is going over a particular distance and in a particular direction. Now, in traditional risk management, when you are conducting a risk assessment, and more specifically, when you're conducting a risk analysis within the risk assessment process, the focus really is on the likelihood and impact of a risk, which is then used to create what is referred to as heat maps. Now, increasingly, as we have seen in the literature, a crucial dimension, that is the third dimension, is being added or recognized and measured, which is referred to as the risk velocity, or the speed at which an exposure can impact the entire organization. Now, when this concept of risk velocity is applied to risk management, it clearly indicates how fast a risk may affect an organization, or simply as the time to impact of the occurrence of the risk. You can also think of risk velocity in terms of an estimate of the time, frame within which a risk may occur. So this is what we know to be the risk heat map, where you plot the probability against the impact of an event. So at the extreme, that's where you have the extreme risk areas, and then followed by the high risk. Of course, this varies from one organization to the other. And so this helps an organization to prioritize in terms of where to focus their resources, in terms of trying to mitigate or to control risk. Now, essentially, therefore, there are two aspects to this concept of risk velocity. First, it is the speed at which a risk can materialize. It is an estimate of the time frame within which a risk may occur. And then, of course, the second perspective of risk velocity is the speed between the risk event occurring and the impact being felt. Now, there is a widespread debate amongst risk management professionals, and I happen to be part of this debate, over the value of trying to identify risk velocity when analyzing a risk. Some believe that risk velocity provides an additional way of considering risk, while others see it as an unnecessary complication. But there are clearly two schools of thought there. Now, so when you add velocity, risk velocity into the heat map, what you get gets a little bit complicated. But if you have a mathematical or scientific mind, this is not really complicating. Risk velocity is just an addition to try to understand and appreciate what the true position is, when a risk does crystallize in an organization. So adding risk velocity makes the story more interesting, as it were. Now, there are two main approaches to evaluating risk velocity, two main approaches. One is you take the likelihood, you add velocity to it, and then you multiply by the impact. Or the second approach is to take the likelihood, multiply by the impact before you then add the velocity. They will produce different results mathematically, as you can see. The first approach produces 40, while the second approach produces 16, given those parameters for likelihood, for impact, and also for risk velocity. Now, a major advantage of assessing the velocity of risk is that organizations are able to plan ahead, to implement preemptive and recovery processes. And this is especially, true in situations where risk velocity is said to be high, and recovery actions need to be swift in order to both reduce the impact to a manageable level and to enable the organization to return to business as usual as soon as possible. It is therefore argued that the board of directors, in terms of providing their risk oversight responsibility, should be able to prompt management to incorporate risk velocity into their current assessment of risk. And I think I tend to tilt towards this, this direction, that risk velocity should be added. But regardless of the approach adopted by organizations, the consideration for risk velocity will allow for improved preparation and responses to risk. But of course, others just simply argue that this is just unnecessary, and they argue for simplicity. So that's the way it is. So it depends on each organization. There's no one size that fits all. If your organization is quite complex enough, and you have the risk experts within the organization who can incorporate risk velocity, I don't have a problem with that. But those who want to keep it simple, they can as well, leave out risk velocity, and no serious harm will be done. So I hope that this presentation has been able to explain very clearly what risk velocity is all about, and the likely benefits of incorporating risk velocity into our risk assessment process. Thank you very much. I remain Dr. Emmanuel Abolo, the Risk Master.